You walk into a room and within seconds before a single word is spoken, you know exactly who holds the real power. You can sense the person drowning in anxiety behind their confident smile. You recognize the one carrying secrets they've never told another soul. This isn't magic. This isn't some mystical gift reserved for the chosen few. This is psychology, and by the end of this video, you'll possess a skill that will fundamentally alter how you navigate every human interaction for the rest of your life. But I need to warn you about something first. What I'm about to reveal isn't just another social hack or party trick. The ability to read people instantly carries with it a profound responsibility, because once you see through the masks we all wear, you can never unsee what lies beneath. You'll discover that most people are walking through life wearing elaborate costumes, performing roles they believe will keep them safe, accepted, loved. And you'll be the one standing backstage, watching the entire performance unfold. There's a reason this knowledge has been guarded by therapists, interrogators, and master manipulators throughout history. When you can decode the hidden language of human behavior, when you can peer behind the carefully constructed facades people present to the world, you gain access to something far more valuable than money or status. You gain access to truth. Raw, unfiltered human truth. Now, I could have titled this video something safe, like how to improve your social skills or basic body language tips. But that would be a lie, because what we're exploring today goes far deeper than simple observation techniques. We're diving into the unconscious patterns that govern human behavior, the invisible threads that connect what people think, what they feel, and what they desperately try to hide. You see, every person you encounter is broadcasting information constantly, not through their words, which are often carefully chosen to conceal rather than reveal, but through a complex symphony of micro-expressions, posture shifts, vocal tonality, and energy signatures that most people remain completely unconscious of. They're speaking a language they don't even know they're fluent in, telling stories about themselves that they would never consciously choose to share. The tragic irony is that while everyone is desperately trying to be understood, to be seen, to be known, they spend most of their energy constructing barriers that prevent exactly that connection from happening. They armor themselves with pleasantries and small talk, with personas carefully crafted for different audiences, with smiles that never quite reach their eyes. And yet, underneath all of that protective layering, they're screaming to be recognized for who they really are. This creates what I call the recognition paradox. The very people who most need to be seen are often the ones working hardest to remain invisible. The ones who appear most confident are frequently drowning in self-doubt. The individuals who seem to have it all together are often barely holding the pieces of their lives in place. And here's what most people don't realize. These contradictions aren't flaws in the human design. They're features. They're the breadcrumbs that, when you know how to follow them, lead you directly to the core of who someone really is. But before we dive into the specific techniques that will allow you to read anyone within moments of meeting them, I need you to understand something crucial about the nature of human consciousness itself. Most people believe they're the author of their own thoughts, the director of their own emotions, the master of their own reactions. This belief is perhaps the greatest illusion we carry about ourselves. The truth is far more humbling and far more useful. The vast majority of human behavior is driven by unconscious processes, automatic responses that developed over years of conditioning, trauma, and adaptation. When someone crosses their arms during a conversation, they're not consciously deciding to create a barrier. When someone's pupils dilate while discussing a particular topic, they're not choosing to reveal their level of interest or arousal. When someone's voice drops to a whisper when mentioning a certain person's name, they're not strategically signaling the emotional weight that relationship carries for them. These responses happen below the threshold of conscious awareness, which means they're incredibly difficult to fake or manipulate. They're like a direct pipeline to someone's internal world, broadcasting their true feelings, fears, desires, and intentions in real time. And once you learn to decode this constant stream of unconscious communication, you'll wonder how you ever navigated relationships without this knowledge. Now, I want to share something with you that fundamentally changed how I understand human nature. Several years ago, I was sitting in a coffee shop, observing the interactions around me, when I noticed something remarkable. Every single person in that space was engaged in what appeared to be two completely different conversations simultaneously. There was the surface conversation, the words being exchanged about weekend plans and work projects, and the weather. And then there was the deeper conversation, the one being conducted through posture and proximity, through the rhythm of breathing and the direction of gaze, through the subtle dance of approach and withdrawal that revealed what people actually wanted from each other. It was like discovering that everyone around me was bilingual, fluently speaking a language I had been deaf to my entire life. The woman at the corner table wasn't just complaining about her job to her friend. She was unconsciously demonstrating her need for validation through the way she leaned forward, seeking physical closeness. She was revealing her fear of abandonment through the way she monitored her friend's facial expressions for any sign of boredom or judgment. She was broadcasting her deep loneliness through the way she stretched the conversation far beyond its natural conclusion, desperate to maintain connection for just a few more moments. The businessman on his phone wasn't just discussing quarterly projections with his colleague. He was performing dominance through his expansive posture, claiming territory in the shared space. He was revealing his insecurity through the way his voice grew louder when other conversations threatened to overshadow his own. He was demonstrating his disconnection from his own emotional world through the rigid control he maintained over every gesture, every expression, every breath. This is when I realized that learning to read people isn't about becoming some kind of human lie detector or manipulation expert. It's about developing the ability to see beyond the performance to the person underneath. It's about recognizing that every human behavior, no matter how puzzling or contradictory it might seem on the surface, is actually a perfectly logical response to that person's internal world, their history, their wounds, their deepest fears and desires. And here's what makes this skill so powerful. Once you can see people clearly, without the distortion of projection or assumption, you can finally meet them where they actually are instead of where you think they should be. You can offer them what they actually need instead of what you think they want. You can build genuine connection instead of surface-level interaction. You can navigate conflict with understanding instead of reactivity. You can influence with compassion instead of coercion. But mastering this ability requires something that most people find deeply uncomfortable. You have to become willing to see people as they are, not as you wish they were or as they pretend to be. You have to develop tolerance for the messy, contradictory, often painful reality of human experience. You have to accept that everyone, including yourself, is carrying invisible wounds, fighting invisible battles, and constructing elaborate defenses against vulnerabilities they may not even consciously recognize. This means that true people reading isn't a weapon to be used against others. It's not a tool for judgment or superiority or manipulation. It's a form of profound empathy, a way of honoring the complexity and humanity of every person you encounter. When you can see someone's fear behind their anger, their longing behind their withdrawal, their pain behind their aggression, you naturally respond with more compassion, more patience, more wisdom. The techniques I'm about to share with you will give you access to information that people spend enormous energy trying to conceal. With that access comes responsibility. The question you must ask yourself is this: will you use this knowledge to build bridges or walls? Will you use it to understand or to exploit? Will you use it to heal or to harm? Because here's what I've discovered after years of studying human behavior. The people who use psychological insights to manipulate others eventually find themselves isolated and empty, surrounded by relationships built on deception and control. But those who use the same knowledge to truly see and serve others create connections of extraordinary depth and meaning, relationships that nourish everyone involved. So, as we prepare to dive into the specific techniques that will allow you to read anyone within moments of meeting them, I want you to make a commitment. Not to me, but to yourself and to every person whose inner world you'll soon be able to access. Commit to using this knowledge with wisdom, with compassion, with respect for the sacred vulnerability that every human being carries within them. Because once you see through the masks, once you recognize the patterns, once you understand the hidden language of human behavior, you'll realize something profound. We're all just trying to be loved, trying to be safe, trying to matter in a world that often feels indifferent to our existence. And perhaps that recognition, that fundamental understanding of our shared humanity, is the most valuable skill of all. Now, let's begin your transformation into someone who can instantly read the hidden depths of every person you meet. The first principle you must understand is what I call the authenticity gap. Every person exists in the space between who they truly are and who they believe they need to be to survive in the world. This gap creates tension, and tension always finds expression through the body, through micro movements, through unconscious behaviors that reveal the internal struggle between authentic self and performed identity. When you meet someone new, they're not just deciding what to say to you, they're unconsciously calculating how much of their real self they can safely reveal without risking rejection, judgment, or abandonment. This calculation happens in milliseconds, faster than conscious thought, and it leaves traces throughout their entire presentation. The wider someone's authenticity gap, the more energy they expend maintaining their mask. And energy expenditure always shows up in predictable ways. You'll notice it first in their breathing patterns. Someone performing a version of themselves that feels foreign will breathe more shallowly, more controlled. Their natural rhythm gets hijacked by the effort of conscious presentation. Watch their shoulders. Authentic presence allows for natural, relaxed shoulder positioning. But when someone is performing, managing their image, trying to be someone they're not, their shoulders will carry the weight of that performance. They'll sit slightly higher, held in place by invisible strings of tension that connect directly to their fear of being discovered. But here's where most people reading about body language get it wrong. They focus on individual gestures, isolated movements, as if humans were walking collections of separate signals. The crossed arms mean defensiveness. The fidgeting means nervousness. The eye contact means confidence. This mechanical approach misses the symphony of human expression entirely. What you're looking for instead is congruence, or the lack thereof. When someone's words, tone, posture, and energy are all aligned, when they're all telling the same story, you're witnessing authentic expression. But when these elements contradict each other, when there's a discord between what they're saying and how they're being, you've found the crack in their constructed identity. Let me give you a specific example. You're introduced to someone at a networking event. They extend their hand confidently, maintain steady eye contact, and say with apparent enthusiasm, "It's so great to meet you. I've been looking forward to connecting with someone in your field." The words are perfect. The delivery seems polished, but something feels off. Here's what your unconscious mind is picking up on that your conscious mind hasn't yet processed. Their handshake, while firm, lasted a fraction of a second too long, revealing their need to prove their confidence rather than simply embody it. Their eye contact, while steady, has a quality of performance to it, as if they're remembering to maintain it rather than naturally engaging. Their voice, while enthusiastic, has a slight uptick at the end of statements that should be declarative, unconsciously seeking approval for their own assertions. These micro-incongruences are breadcrumbs leading you to a deeper truth about this person. They want desperately to make a good impression. They've likely rehearsed this interaction, or at least interactions like it, many times before. They're operating from a place of scarcity rather than abundance, believing they need to prove their worth rather than simply share their authentic presence. But here's the crucial insight. Recognizing these patterns isn't about judging this person for their insecurity or performance. It's about understanding the tender, vulnerable human being underneath the polished exterior. This person is probably intelligent, capable, and accomplished, but they're also terrified of not being enough, of being found wanting, of being rejected for who they really are. When you can see past their performance to their humanity, everything changes about how you interact with them. Instead of responding to their surface presentation, you can respond to their deeper need. Instead of matching their energy of trying to impress, you can offer them the safety of authentic engagement. Instead of playing along with their performance, you can give them permission to simply be themselves. This is where true influence begins. Not through manipulation or clever techniques, but through creating space for people to drop their masks and connect from a place of truth. When someone feels truly seen and accepted for who they are beneath their performance, they naturally relax into authenticity. And authentic connection is exponentially more powerful than any surface-level interaction. Now, let's talk about emotional leakage. No matter how skilled someone becomes at managing their conscious presentation, emotions always find a way to express themselves. They leak through micro-expressions that flash across the face for fractions of a second. They seep through changes in vocal tone that occur between words. They emerge through shifts in posture that happen during transitions between topics. The key to reading these leaks is understanding that emotions are energy in motion, and energy always seeks expression. When someone tries to suppress or hide an emotion, they don't eliminate it. They simply redirect it. And that redirection creates patterns you can learn to recognize. Fear, for instance, doesn't disappear when someone puts on a brave face. It shows up in the slight constriction of their throat that makes their voice sound just a bit more controlled than natural. It appears in the way they hold their breath for a moment too long before speaking. It reveals itself in the micro-tension around their eyes, even when they're smiling. Anger doesn't vanish when someone maintains professional composure. It leaks through the barely perceptible tightening of their jaw. It emerges in the way their hands form subtle fists, even when they're gesturing casually. It shows up in the increased pace of their speech, even when their tone remains calm. Sadness doesn't disappear behind a cheerful demeanor. It pulls in the slight downward pull at the corners of their mouth, even when they're laughing. It shows in the way their energy seems to move downward, as if they're being pulled by invisible weights. It reveals itself in moments of stillness that last just a beat too long, as if they're fighting the urge to collapse inward. But here's what makes emotional leakage so revealing. It's almost impossible to fake in the opposite direction. While someone can hide joy behind a neutral expression, they can't manufacture genuine joy where none exists. While they can mask anger with pleasantness, they can't create authentic warmth when they're seething inside. This means that when you see genuine positive emotions, you're witnessing something real about that person's internal state. When their eyes crinkle with authentic laughter, when their posture opens with genuine interest, when their voice softens with real affection, you're getting a glimpse of who they are when they're not performing. These moments of authentic positive emotion are incredibly valuable for understanding someone, because they reveal what actually brings them joy, what genuinely interests them, what truly matters to them. And when you can recognize and respond to these authentic moments, you create connection at a level that most people never experience. But reading people isn't just about observing them in isolation. It's about understanding how they respond to different stimuli, how they adapt to changing circumstances, how they interact with various types of people. This is where the concept of behavioral flexibility becomes crucial. Some people have developed a wide range of adaptive responses. They can be professional with colleagues, playful with friends, nurturing with family members, each version authentic to the context while remaining fundamentally consistent at their core. These individuals tend to be more psychologically healthy, more emotionally intelligent, more capable of genuine intimacy. Other people have a more limited range of responses. They might be stuck in one mode regardless of context, bringing the same energy to every situation, whether it's appropriate or not. Or they might have developed a few distinct personas that feel disconnected from each other, switching between them in ways that create internal conflict and external confusion. When you meet someone, pay attention to how they respond as the conversation moves through different topics, different emotional territories, different levels of depth. Do they maintain the same mask throughout, or do you see subtle shifts that reveal different aspects of their personality? Do these shifts feel natural and integrated, or do they feel jarring and performed? Someone who can only operate in one mode, regardless of context, is likely dealing with some form of emotional rigidity. They've found a way of being in the world that feels safe, and they're afraid to deviate from it, even when the situation calls for adaptation. This isn't a character flaw. It's usually a protective mechanism that developed in response to experiences where flexibility felt dangerous. Understanding this allows you to interact with them in a way that honors their need for consistency while gently creating space for them to experiment with other ways of being. You're not trying to force them out of their comfort zone, but you're offering them the safety to explore beyond their habitual patterns if they choose to. On the other hand, someone who shifts too dramatically between different personas might be struggling with identity fragmentation. They've learned to be whoever they think each situation requires, but they've lost touch with their authentic core. These individuals often feel like they're living multiple lives that never quite connect, leaving them feeling isolated even in crowded rooms. The most revealing moments come when someone's carefully constructed presentation suddenly cracks. This happens during what I call pressure points, moments when their emotional or psychological resources become strained. Maybe they receive unexpected criticism. Perhaps someone challenges their expertise in an area they pride themselves on, or they're forced to discuss a topic that touches on unresolved pain or trauma. Watch what happens in these moments. Do they double down on their performance, becoming even more rigid in their presentation? Do they become defensive, revealing the insecurities they've been working so hard to hide? Or do they allow themselves a moment of genuine vulnerability, letting you see the human being behind the mask? These pressure point responses tell you everything about someone's relationship with their own emotions, their capacity for growth, their level of self-awareness, and their ability to maintain connection even when feeling threatened. Someone who can remain present and authentic even under pressure is demonstrating profound emotional mastery. Someone who immediately retreats into performance or attack mode is showing you exactly where their unhealed wounds live. But here's where the psychology becomes truly fascinating. Most people don't just have one mask, they have an entire wardrobe of identities they wear, depending on who they're with and what they believe each situation requires. The version of themselves they present to their boss is different from the one they show their spouse, which is different from the one they reveal to their children, which is different from the one they display to strangers. This isn't necessarily problematic. We all adapt our communication style and energy to different contexts. The question is whether these adaptations feel natural and integrated or forced and fragmented. When someone's various personas feel like authentic expressions of different aspects of their whole self, you're witnessing healthy psychological flexibility. When they feel like completely different people, depending on the context, you're seeing someone who has lost touch with their core identity. You can detect this by paying attention to what remains consistent across different interactions. Even as someone adapts their style to different situations, certain fundamental qualities should remain stable. Their basic values, their core emotional patterns, their underlying way of processing information, these elements reveal who they are beneath all the surface adaptations. Someone who maintains this consistency while still being appropriately flexible demonstrates what psychologists call integrated identity. They know who they are, and they can express that authentic self in ways that fit different contexts without betraying their fundamental nature. These individuals tend to be more trustworthy, more reliable, more capable of deep intimacy, because you're always interacting with the same core person, even as their expression varies. But someone whose adaptations feel disconnected from any consistent core is likely struggling with identity confusion. They may have learned to be such effective chameleons that they've lost touch with their authentic colours. These individuals often feel empty or hollow inside, despite being skilled at social interaction, because they've traded authentic connection for adaptive approval seeking. Now let's explore something that most people completely miss when they're trying to read others: the power of silence and space. What someone doesn't say is often more revealing than what they do say. How they handle pauses, gaps in conversation, moments of uncertainty, these responses provide direct insight into their relationship with their own inner world. Some people are comfortable with silence. They can sit in quiet moments without rushing to fill them with words. They can pause to consider their responses instead of reacting automatically. They can allow conversations to breathe, to develop naturally, to find their own rhythm. This comfort with silence usually indicates someone who has a good relationship with their own thoughts and feelings, someone who doesn't need constant external stimulation to feel okay about themselves. Other people are terrified of silence. They compulsively fill every gap with words, even when they have nothing meaningful to say. They interrupt not because they're rude, but because the space between words feels dangerous to them. They ask rapid-fire questions not because they're genuinely curious, but because they need the safety of continuous verbal exchange. This fear of silence often indicates someone who is afraid of their own inner experience, someone who has learned to use external noise to drown out internal discomfort. Understanding someone's relationship with silence and space gives you profound insight into their emotional development. Those who can be present with emptiness, with uncertainty, with the unknown, have usually done significant work on themselves. They've learned to tolerate difficult emotions without immediately seeking escape. They've developed the capacity to sit with questions that don't have easy answers. Those who cannot tolerate silence or space are often still running from parts of themselves they haven't learned to accept. This isn't a judgment. We all have aspects of our inner experience that feel challenging to face. But recognizing this pattern allows you to understand why someone might seem anxious in quiet moments, why they might struggle with introspection, why they might prefer surface-level interaction to deeper exploration. The way someone responds to your own silence is equally revealing. When you pause before responding, when you take time to consider your words, when you allow natural quiet to exist in your interaction, do they respect that space, or do they immediately try to fill it? Their response tells you about their capacity to honor both your internal process and their own. There's another layer to this that most people never consider: the quality of someone's attention. Not whether they're paying attention to you, but how they pay attention. Some people listen with their entire being. They're present not just with their ears, but with their whole self. Their body is still, their breathing is calm, their energy is focused and receptive. When they respond, it's clear they've actually absorbed and considered what you've shared. Others listen while simultaneously preparing their own response. They're present in body but absent in spirit, using your words as a launching pad for their own thoughts rather than truly receiving what you're offering. Their attention has a restless quality, always moving ahead to what they want to say next, rather than remaining present with what's being said now. This quality of attention reveals something fundamental about someone's capacity for genuine connection. Those who can offer their full presence create space for authentic intimacy. Those who are always partially elsewhere, always preparing their next performance, create relationships that feel simultaneously crowded and empty, full of interaction but lacking in true meeting. But perhaps the most powerful tool for reading people instantly is understanding what I call their core organizing principle. Every person has developed a fundamental strategy for navigating life, a primary way of ensuring their safety and meeting their needs. This strategy usually developed in childhood as an adaptation to their early environment, and it continues to operate largely unconsciously throughout their adult life. Some people's core organizing principle is achievement. They've learned that being successful, productive, accomplished is the way to ensure love and security. Everything they do is filtered through this lens. Will this make me more successful? Will this prove my worth? Will this demonstrate my value to others? Others organize their lives around connection. They've learned that maintaining relationships, keeping people happy, avoiding conflict is the key to safety. Their internal compass constantly asks, will this person like me? Am I maintaining harmony? Am I meeting everyone's needs? Still others prioritize control. They've learned that being prepared, having plans, anticipating problems is the way to feel secure. Their mental energy goes toward managing variables, creating structure, ensuring predictability. Each of these strategies has strengths and shadows. The achiever gets things done, but might struggle with rest and relationship. The connector creates harmony, but might lose themselves in others' needs. The controller creates stability, but might miss opportunities that require flexibility. When you can identify someone's core organizing principle, you can understand the deeper logic behind all their surface behaviors. You can predict how they'll respond to different situations, what will motivate them, what will threaten them, what will bring out their best and their worst. More importantly, you can interact with them in ways that honor their fundamental strategy, while also offering them opportunities to expand beyond its limitations. You're not trying to change their core organizing principle. That would be both impossible and unnecessary. You're simply creating space for them to express it in healthier, more integrated ways. This level of understanding transforms every interaction from a surface-level exchange to a profound recognition of the human being in front of you. When you can see not just what someone is doing, but why they're doing it, when you can recognize the deeper needs and fears that drive their behavior, you naturally respond with more compassion, more wisdom, more skillful engagement. And here's what I've discovered. When people feel truly seen and understood at this level, when they recognize that you're responding to who they really are rather than who they're pretending to be, something magical happens. Their defenses relax. Their performance softens. Their authentic self begins to emerge, not because you've manipulated them into vulnerability, but because you've created the safety that allows their natural humanity to shine through. This is the true power of being able to read people instantly. It's not about gaining advantage over them. It's about creating the conditions for genuine human connection. It's about honoring the complexity and beauty of every person you encounter. It's about remembering that beneath all our masks and strategies and protective mechanisms, we're all just souls trying to find our way home to ourselves and to each other. The moment you truly understand someone's core organizing principle, you unlock what I call the recognition threshold. This is the point where your perception shifts from seeing their behaviors as random or confusing to recognizing them as perfect expressions of their internal logic. And once you cross this threshold, something profound happens in your interactions with them. But there's a deeper layer we need to explore, one that most people never discover because it requires you to look beyond individual psychology into what Jung called the collective unconscious. Every person carries within them not just their own patterns and wounds, but archetypal energies that have been shaping human behavior for millennia. When you meet someone, you're not just encountering their personal history. You're meeting the ancient patterns that live within them, the universal themes that connect them to every human who has ever walked this earth. The warrior who must always be strong, the caretaker who cannot rest while others suffer, the rebel who defines themselves through opposition, the sage who seeks understanding above all else. These archetypal energies operate like invisible currents beneath the surface of personality. They influence how someone speaks, how they move, how they relate to authority, how they handle conflict, how they express love. And when you learn to recognize these deeper patterns, you gain access to a level of understanding that feels almost mystical in its accuracy. Let me share an example that will illustrate this perfectly. You're in a business meeting with someone you've never met before. Within the first few minutes, you notice certain telltale signs. They sit slightly forward in their chair, not from enthusiasm, but from a subtle readiness to act. Their questions cut straight to practical implications rather than exploring theoretical possibilities. When others speak, they listen with a quality of assessment, evaluating not just the content, but the competence of the speaker. Their handshake was firm but brief, conveying capability without seeking connection. Their clothing is well chosen but understated, suggesting someone who understands the power of appropriate presentation without needing to peacock. When they disagree with something, they do so directly but without personal attack, focusing on the issue rather than the individual. What you're witnessing is the warrior archetype in its mature, integrated form. This person has internalized the warrior's gift for decisive action and strategic thinking, but they've also learned to wield these qualities with wisdom rather than aggression. They're not trying to dominate the room, but they naturally command respect through their presence and competence. Understanding this allows you to interact with them in ways that honor their warrior nature while creating space for collaboration rather than competition. You can present ideas in terms of challenges to be overcome rather than problems to be solved. You can frame decisions as strategic choices rather than mere preferences. You can appeal to their sense of purpose and mission rather than trying to manipulate them through emotional appeals. But here's where this gets truly fascinating. The same archetypal energy can express itself in radically different ways depending on someone's level of consciousness and integration. An unconscious warrior becomes a bully, using aggression to mask insecurity. A wounded warrior becomes paralyzed, afraid to act because past battles have left them scarred. A shadow warrior becomes manipulative, using strategic thinking to exploit others rather than serve a higher purpose. When you can recognize not just which archetypal energy someone carries, but how consciously they're expressing it, you gain profound insight into their psychological development. You can see not just who they are now, but who they're capable of becoming. You can identify their greatest strengths and their most vulnerable wounds. You can understand what will inspire them and what will trigger their defensive reactions. This level of perception requires something that most people find deeply uncomfortable: the willingness to see beyond the stories people tell about themselves. Every person has a narrative they've constructed about who they are, why they do, what their motivations and intentions are. And while this narrative always contains elements of truth, it's never the complete picture. The gap between someone's self-story and their actual patterns of behavior is where the real information lives. Someone might describe themselves as independent and self-sufficient, while unconsciously seeking constant validation from others. Another person might claim to value honesty above all else, while regularly engaging in subtle forms of deception, especially self-deception. These contradictions aren't signs of moral failure. They're indicators of the universal human struggle between who we think we are and who we actually are, between our conscious intentions and our unconscious patterns. Everyone, without exception, has blind spots about themselves. Everyone has aspects of their personality that they cannot see clearly. When you develop the ability to recognize these blind spots in others, you're not gaining ammunition to use against them. You're developing the capacity to see them more completely than they can see themselves. And this complete seeing, when wielded with compassion rather than judgment, becomes a profound gift you can offer to every relationship. But there's a shadow side to this ability that we must address directly. When you can see through people's carefully constructed presentations to their underlying patterns and wounds, there's a temptation to use this knowledge for personal advantage. You might find yourself thinking, if I know they need validation, I can manipulate them by withholding or providing approval strategically. This temptation is not just morally problematic, it's psychologically self-destructive. When you use deep psychological insights to manipulate others, you begin to relate to people as objects to be managed rather than as fellow souls to be honored. You start to see their vulnerabilities as weaknesses to exploit rather than as tender places that deserve protection. The inevitable result is a profound loneliness. You become surrounded by people who respond to your manipulation tactics, but none of them actually know the real you. You create relationships based on control rather than connection, and control can never satisfy the soul's deepest hunger for authentic intimacy. Instead, the highest use of the ability to read people instantly is to become what I call a sacred witness. You see someone completely, including the parts they cannot see about themselves, and you hold that seeing with reverence rather than judgment. You use your insight to meet them where they actually are rather than where they pretend to be. You offer them the profound gift of being truly known. This kind of witnessing has healing power that operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. When someone feels truly seen and accepted, not just for their polished presentation, but for their whole complex humanity, something in them naturally begins to relax and integrate. They start to feel safer being authentic because they've experienced that their authenticity can be received with love rather than rejection. Now, let's explore what might be the most powerful technique for instant people reading: understanding someone's relationship with their own power. Every person has developed a particular way of experiencing and expressing their personal power, and this pattern reveals more about their character than almost any other single factor. Some people are comfortable with their own power. They can make decisions without excessive second-guessing. They can take up appropriate space in conversations and relationships. They can say no when necessary and yes when inspired. They can influence others without becoming controlling or manipulative. Their relationship with power feels natural and integrated. Others are afraid of their own power. They've learned that being powerful is dangerous, either because it threatens relationships or because it carries responsibilities they don't feel ready to handle. These individuals often undermine themselves, sabotaging their own success, dimming their own light to make others comfortable. They might be incredibly capable, but they consistently operate below their actual potential. Still others have a complicated relationship with power, swinging between extremes. Sometimes they're completely passive, allowing others to make decisions for them, going along with things they don't actually want. Other times they become controlling or domineering, trying to manage every variable in their environment. This inconsistency usually indicates unresolved trauma around power dynamics from their past. You can assess someone's relationship with power within minutes of meeting them. Listen to how they speak about their own choices and decisions. Do they own their preferences confidently, or do they constantly hedge and qualify? I think maybe we should probably consider possibly doing this, if that's okay with everyone else. This kind of language reveals someone who is afraid to claim their own authority. Watch how they respond when given choices. Do they make decisions efficiently, or do they become paralyzed by options? Do they seek excessive input from others before choosing, or can they trust their own judgment? Someone who cannot make simple decisions without consulting multiple people is usually someone who doesn't trust their own power to choose well. Notice how they handle disagreement or conflict. Do they can stand in their truth while still remaining open to other perspectives, or do they either collapse into agreement or become rigidly defensive? The ability to maintain your own position while engaging respectfully with opposing views requires a secure relationship with your own power. Observe how they relate to authority figures. Do they automatically defer, becoming smaller in the presence of someone they perceive as more powerful? Do they become rebellious or competitive, needing to prove they're not subordinate? Or can they relate to authority figures as equals, respecting appropriate hierarchies without losing their own sense of worth? Perhaps most revealing of all, pay attention to how they respond when you reflect their own power back to them. If you acknowledge their competence, their insight, their strength, how do they receive that recognition? Someone who is comfortable with their power can accept genuine acknowledgement gracefully. Someone who fears their power will deflect, minimize, or become uncomfortable when their capabilities are recognized. This assessment of power dynamics gives you crucial information about how to interact with someone effectively. If they're afraid of their own power, pushing them to be more assertive will likely trigger their defenses. Instead, you can create safety for them to experiment with small expressions of their preferences and boundaries. If they're comfortable with power but respectful about it, you can engage with them as equals, trusting them to handle direct communication and honest feedback. But if someone has an unhealthy relationship with power, either constantly trying to dominate others or completely unable to stand in their own authority, this tells you something important about their psychological development. They're likely still working through early experiences that taught them power was either dangerous or unavailable to them. Understanding this allows you to interact with them in ways that neither trigger their power wounds nor enable their dysfunctional patterns. You can model healthy power dynamics, showing them what it looks like to be strong without being controlling, influential without being manipulative, confident without being arrogant. There's another dimension of instant people reading that operates through what I call emotional contagion patterns. Every person has developed particular strategies for managing the emotional energy of others, and these strategies reveal profound information about their psychological makeup and relationship history. Some people are natural emotional regulators. They unconsciously calm chaotic energy, bring groundedness to anxious situations, offer stability to those who are overwhelmed. These individuals often learned early in life that their value lay in their ability to soothe others, to create harmony, to be the steady presence that others could rely on. Others are emotional amplifiers. They unconsciously intensify whatever energy is present in a room. If there's excitement, they make it more exciting. If there's tension, they make it more tense. If there's sadness, they deepen it. These individuals are often highly sensitive and empathic, but they haven't learned to distinguish between feeling with others and being overwhelmed by others. Still others are emotional deflectors. They unconsciously redirect difficult emotions, either through humor, distraction, intellectualization, or simply changing the subject whenever things get too intense. These individuals usually learned that emotional intensity was dangerous, so they developed sophisticated strategies for avoiding or diffusing it. You can identify someone's emotional contagion pattern by paying attention to what happens to the energy in the room when they arrive. Does everything become calmer and more centered? Do emotions become more intense and dramatic? Does difficult or uncomfortable energy seem to mysteriously disappear or transform into something safer? Understanding these patterns gives you insight into someone's early emotional environment and their current capacity for intimacy. Natural emotional regulators often come from chaotic families where they learn to be the stable one. Emotional amplifiers frequently grew up with emotionally distant or suppressed caregivers, learning that they needed to intensify feelings to get any response at all. Emotional deflectors typically experienced emotional intensity as threatening or overwhelming, developing protective mechanisms that help them survive, but now limit their capacity for deep connection. None of these patterns are inherently good or bad, but they all have implications for how someone will show up in relationships. The emotional regulator might struggle to express their own needs because they're so focused on managing everyone else's emotions. The emotional amplifier might create unnecessary drama because they don't know how to connect without intensity. The emotional deflector might avoid the very vulnerability that intimacy requires. When you can recognize these patterns, you can adjust your own emotional expression in ways that create safety and connection. With an emotional regulator, you might need to be more direct about your own needs since they won't naturally focus on them. With an emotional amplifier, you might need to model emotional stability so they can experience what calm connection feels like. With an emotional deflector, you might need to approach vulnerable topics gradually, showing them that emotional intensity doesn't have to be dangerous. But here's where this understanding becomes truly powerful. When you can see someone's emotional patterns clearly, you can also see their growth edges. The emotional regulator who learns to prioritize their own needs becomes a masterful leader. The emotional amplifier who learns discernment becomes an incredible healer and teacher. The emotional deflector who learns to stay present with intensity becomes capable of profound intimacy. You're not just reading who someone is now, you're seeing who they could become with the right support and encouragement. And sometimes simply being seen in this way, having someone recognize both your current patterns and your potential for growth, is enough to catalyze transformation. This brings us to perhaps the most subtle but powerful aspect of instant people reading: recognizing someone's relationship with their own potential. Every person has a sense, usually unconscious, of what they're capable of. This sense might be accurate or distorted, hopeful or pessimistic, energizing or paralyzing, but it profoundly influences how they show up in the world. Some people live comfortably within their known capabilities. They have a realistic sense of their strengths and limitations, and they operate confidently within that framework. They're not trying to be more than they are, but they're also not settling for less than they're capable of. These individuals tend to have stable self-esteem and consistent performance. Others are constantly reaching beyond their current abilities. They have a sense that they're capable of more than they've yet achieved, and this drives them to continuously challenge themselves. These individuals are often high achievers, but they may also struggle with never feeling satisfied with their accomplishments. Still others have resigned themselves to operating below their potential. They may have experienced failures or discouragement that convince them they're not capable of more than they're currently doing. These individuals often have untapped abilities that they're not accessing because they don't believe in their own capacity for growth. You can sense someone's relationship with their potential through the energy they bring to challenges and opportunities. When presented with something new or difficult, do they light up with interest, or do they immediately start explaining why it won't work for them? Do they ask questions about how to succeed, or do they focus on reasons they might fail? Listen to how they talk about their past achievements and future goals. Do they speak with pride about what they've accomplished while maintaining humility about what they still need to learn? Do they dismiss their successes as luck while setting impossibly high standards for future performance? Or do they seem to have given up on the possibility of significant growth or change? This assessment tells you something crucial about how to inspire and motivate this person. Someone who lives comfortably within their abilities needs challenges that stretch them just slightly beyond their comfort zone. Someone who constantly reaches beyond their current capabilities needs grounding and appreciation for what they've already achieved. Someone who has resigned themselves to limitation needs gentle encouragement and evidence that growth is still possible. But more than that, understanding someone's relationship with their potential allows you to see the deeper story of their life. What experiences taught them to believe in themselves or to doubt their capabilities? What dreams are they still carrying, and what dreams have they abandoned? What would need to shift for them to access more of their natural gifts and abilities? When you can perceive these deeper layers of someone's psychology within moments of meeting them, you're no longer just making small talk or going through social motions. You're engaging with the full human being in front of you, recognizing both who they are now and who they're capable of becoming. This level of seeing transforms every interaction into an opportunity for profound connection and mutual growth. You're not just reading people to understand them better. You're reading them to serve them better, to love them better, to help them remember the truth of who they really are beneath all their protective strategies and limiting beliefs. And here's what I've discovered after years of developing and teaching these skills. The deeper you can see into others, the deeper you're invited to see into yourself. The patterns you recognize in them become mirrors for your own unconscious dynamics. The compassion you develop for their struggles extends naturally to your own human imperfections. The wisdom you gain about human nature becomes a tool for your own transformation and healing. This is why learning to read people instantly isn't really about other people at all. It's about developing the capacity to see clearly, to love deeply, to engage authentically with the magnificent complexity of human consciousness. It's about remembering that every person you meet is carrying an entire universe of experience, wisdom, pain, and potential. And when you can honor that truth, when you can meet people in that sacred space, everything changes about how you move through the world. The final piece of this psychological puzzle lies in what I call the soul's signature, that ineffable quality that remains constant beneath all the masks, strategies, and adaptations someone has developed. This is not something you can learn to detect through techniques or formulas. This requires you to develop what ancient traditions called second sight, the ability to perceive the essence of a being beyond their temporal presentation. Every soul carries a particular frequency, a unique vibration that expresses itself through countless subtle channels. It's in the quality of their silence, the rhythm of their breathing, the way they hold space around themselves. It's in how they touch objects, how they enter and exit rooms, how they respond to beauty or suffering. This signature is like a fingerprint of consciousness, absolutely individual and impossible to counterfeit. When you learn to perceive this deeper layer, you begin to understand something profound about human nature. The person sitting across from you may be wearing the costume of a successful executive, but their soul signature might carry the frequency of a wounded artist. They may be performing confidence and control, but their essence might be singing with the tender vulnerability of someone who has never felt truly safe to be seen. This discrepancy between soul signature and social presentation is not deception in any malicious sense. It's the tragedy of a world that rarely creates space for authentic being. Most people learn early that their true essence is somehow unacceptable, too much, too little, too strange, too sensitive, too intense, too quiet. And so they construct elaborate personalities designed to earn love, approval, safety, belonging. But the soul never stops broadcasting its true frequency. It cannot help but leak through the cracks of even the most carefully constructed persona. And when you develop the sensitivity to perceive this deeper signal, you can offer people something they may never have experienced: recognition of who they really are, beneath who they think they need to be. There's a moment that occurs in deep human connection that I call the recognition flash. It happens when someone realizes they have been truly seen, not just observed or analyzed, but witnessed in their essence. Their eyes change, their breathing shifts. Something in their posture softens or opens. For just an instant, the mask slips completely away, and you're meeting soul to soul, essence to essence. These moments are sacred. They're also rare. Most people go through entire relationships without ever experiencing this level of being known. They exchange information, share experiences, even create intimacy, but they never quite make contact at the level of essence. They remain strangers to themselves and therefore strangers to each other, no matter how much time they spend together. When you develop the ability to create these moments of recognition, you're not just becoming skilled at reading people. You're becoming a catalyst for awakening, a mirror in which others can finally see their own true face. This is perhaps the greatest gift one human being can offer another: the experience of being known and loved for who they really are. But this level of seeing requires something from you that goes far beyond technique or psychology. It requires you to know yourself at the deepest levels, to have made peace with your own shadows, to have developed genuine compassion for the human struggle. You cannot see clearly in others what you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. You cannot offer authentic recognition if you're still hiding from your own essence. This is why the journey of learning to read people instantly becomes a spiritual practice. Every person you encounter becomes a teacher, a mirror, an opportunity to deepen your understanding of consciousness itself. Their defenses show you where you're still defended. Their fears illuminate your own unhealed wounds. Their beauty reflects back your own capacity for radiance. And as you develop this capacity for deep seeing, you begin to understand something that transforms how you move through the world. Everyone is doing the best they can with the resources they currently have available. That person who seems arrogant is actually terrified of being found inadequate. The individual who appears cold and withdrawn is probably overwhelmed by their own sensitivity. The one who seems controlling is likely trying to create safety in a world that has felt chaotic and unpredictable. This understanding doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it allows you to respond to the person beneath the behavior rather than just reacting to the surface presentation. When you can see someone's deeper struggle, their unconscious pain, their soul's longing for connection and understanding, you naturally respond with more wisdom, more patience, more love. The ultimate goal of being able to read people instantly isn't to gain advantage over them or to satisfy your curiosity about human nature. It's to become fully present to the sacred mystery of consciousness, expressing itself through infinite forms. It's to remember that every interaction is an opportunity for mutual awakening, mutual healing, mutual recognition of the divine spark that lives within every human being. When you can hold this awareness, when you can see both the personality and the essence, both the wounds and the wholeness, both the fear and the love that lives within every person you meet, you become something precious in this world. You become a space where people can remember who they really are. You become a presence that calls forth the best in others simply by seeing it clearly and loving it unconditionally. This is the true power and responsibility of being able to read the human soul. Use it wisely, use it with reverence, use it in service of the highest good. Because in the end, we're all just walking each other home to the truth of who we've always been, beneath the stories we've learned to tell about ourselves. The secret psychology trick to instantly read anyone isn't really a trick at all. It's a remembering, a return to the natural human capacity for deep seeing, authentic connection, and soul recognition that we were all born with but learned to suppress in order to survive in a world that often fears genuine intimacy. Now you have the keys. The question that remains is what you'll build with them. Will you use this knowledge to manipulate and control, or will you use it to love and serve? Will you use it to separate yourself from others through superior understanding, or will you use it to create bridges of connection and recognition? The choice, as always, is yours, and that choice will determine not just how others experience you, but who you become in the process of seeing them. Because in the end, we are all mirrors for each other, reflecting back the light and shadow, the beauty and brokenness, the infinite potential that exists within every human soul. When you learn to see that clearly in others, you cannot help but recognize it in yourself. And that recognition changes everything